South Africa, a beautiful land full of ancient mysteries. The tiny skull of an ape-like animal is discovered that may prove to be the long sought-after missing link. Can the fragile remains of this creature, known as the Taung Child, reveal the truth of who we are and where we came from? And can science solve the mystery of this child's death?
The features that it contained were both ape-like and human-like at the same time. And this led to the description of the fossil as an ape man or a missing link.
It seems very likely that trauma was the killing agent and that that trauma was inflicted by predators.
The Taung Child would have been vulnerable to leopard predation and the predation of saber-toothed cats.
Dr. Kevin Kuykendall is on a mission to find out exactly how this creature died and what its remains can tell us about human evolution. South Africa is a land of contrasts. Cities bustling with life, shops, marketplaces, and businesses. Yet far away from modern human life are vast sweeping savanna lands where the big game stalks. Cheetah, lion, hyena, leopard. And above them birds of prey, all hunting and scavenging for food on the veldt, once the dwelling place of great tribal warriors. This is a place with a long history, and amongst these dusty plains are hidden clues which could unlock the secrets of mankind's earliest beginnings. Millions of years ago, climate changes reduced the great forests, and the sweeping plains of Africa that we know today were created. At this time, the first footsteps were taken by our earliest ancestors. One of them was the Taung Child, a youngster whose premature and violent death is shrouded in mystery. Dr. Kevin Kuykendall, an anatomist from Arizona, has been based in South Africa for 9 years, studying fossil remains of ancient primates. He wants to learn more about the life of the so-called Taung Child and examine the evidence that may reveal details of the Taung Child's death.
The Taung Child fossil preserves many features that give us clues to the way in which it lived. But one of the mysteries that remains is the nature of its death. And so the question I want to investigate is, how did the Taung Child die?
The fossil remains of the Taung Child consist of these 3 fragile pieces: the front half of the cranium, the lower jaw complete with teeth, and an endocranial cast, a stony brain-shaped cast of the inside of the skull. These had lain undisturbed for millions of years, encased in limestone, before being uncovered at a quarry in the northwest province at Taung in 1924. Miners blasting for lime unearthed an interesting fossil. It was the endocranial cast. It was brought to the attention of Raymond Dart, a skilled anatomist working at the University of the Witwatersrand. Dart was intrigued by the shape of the brain that seemed bigger than a chimpanzee, but not as big as that of primitive man. The fossil skull was brought to him, encased in breccia, a hard mixture of sand, rocks, and lime cemented together. Using his wife's knitting needles, Dart began the painstaking job of freeing the fossils from the surrounding rock. When he finally laid eyes on this tiny face, Dart knew immediately that he had something special in his hands, something that would rewrite the history of human evolution.
The Taung Child was a truly remarkable fossil discovery. Even though the fossil consisted of just a few fragments of the cranium and the mandible, the features that it contained were both ape-like and human-like at the same time. And this led to the description of the fossil as an ape man or a missing link.
In 1924, paleontologists were only just starting out on the path to understanding man's prehistoric origins. No remains of an ancient hominid, a word meaning belonging to the family of man, had ever been found in Africa. The discovery was reported with great excitement in South Africa. But what did the rest of the scientific establishment around the world make of it? Raymond Dart's successor at the University of the Witwatersrand, Professor Philip Tobias, explains.
It caused a worldwide stir, most of it unbelieving, incredulous, most of it scornful, critical of Dart. They derided him. He was talking nonsense. It's just a somewhat offbeat, beat-up chimpanzee.
Undeterred, Raymond Dart named this new species Australopithecus africanus, southern ape of Africa. It is today considered to be a likely forerunner of later forms of mankind, which in turn evolved into Homo sapiens, or modern man. The presence of a full set of baby teeth led Dart to conclude that it was a juvenile. Discovering the nature of its premature death, whether through accident, disease, or predator attack, could help us paint a picture of life on the African plains of one of our earliest ancestors. Much of the most important study of human evolution has been done 20 miles away from Taung in Johannesburg, South Africa's commercial and financial center. It is carried out here at the University of the Witwatersrand, where Kevin is now based. Using the latest scientific techniques, he hopes to get a clearer picture of who this child was and exactly how he died. As guardian of the priceless Taung specimen, Professor Tobias has invited Kevin to study at close quarters the original Taung fossil, which is rarely removed from the department's safe.
This specimen is pretty much the one that started paleoanthropology, particularly in South Africa and really around the world. I remember the very first time I looked at it, it was as if I was looking at the crown jewels or something of that nature. It also happens to be one of the most beautiful specimens that exists anywhere. So it's just fascinating anytime to get a chance to look at the original.
Exactly how human was this creature? Its skull gives us several clues as to the extent of the ape-like and human-like features. It clearly illustrates the conundrum facing Raymond Dart upon its discovery.
What Dart found was human-like features and ape-like features, a most astonishing mixture, the likes of which no one had ever come across before. And this is the brain cast, and it is small. And the question was, is it small because it belongs to a child, or is it small because it belonged to a small-brained species? And the answer is it's a bit of both. And this was Dart's big problem. When we compare it with the ape brain, it's comparable in size with the brain size of a chimpanzee of corresponding dental age. And so this was a decidedly ape-like feature.
So why was Dart so convinced that his specimen was in fact more human-like than ape-like?
On the human side, the canine tooth was tiny. It's a milk canine, quite different from the milk canine of a chimpanzee. You see the remarkable difference. Even in the deciduous teeth, it's a fang. And so that was a very human-like feature that Dart drew attention to initially. All the canines of the upper teeth and of the lower teeth were tiny.
So the Taung Child was human-like in the pattern of the teeth. But there was another feature that also appeared distinctly human-like.
On the base of the brain cast, Dart saw features, let's have a look, pointing to that skull having been articulated on a nearly upright vertebral column and not one hanging downwards and forwards as in a chimp or gorilla. The critically important factor he inferred from the base was that it was a biped going on 2 legs and not on 4 legs. And that's the mark of humanity.
So despite having a brain no bigger than an adult gorilla, the Taung Child was no ordinary ape. It had a human-like jaw and had walked upright on 2 legs. In evolutionary terms, it had crossed, or was in the process of crossing, that great divide between ape and man, which is why it was dubbed the missing link. After detailed inspection of the dental development, Dart concluded that the Taung Child was a young male of about 6 years old. However, subsequent analysis has refined this estimate.
We've been able to arrive at a new approach to the dating, studying the microscopic anatomy of the enamel even. And that has shown us that the little child was 3 to 4 years of age when it died.
This ancestor certainly died young, and the cause of death remains in question. Can the sex of the youngster be identified?
It's a difficult problem. Dart always called it a boy, partly because the first molar is very large by modern human standards, but unless you have lots of others to establish a kind of statistical curve of distribution, you can't be sure. In fact, in geological terms...
So the youngster's sex remains a mystery, and so does the cause of its premature death. Was it accident, illness, or disease that killed the Taung Child? Kevin's search for answers takes him half an hour's drive away to South Africa's political and administrative capital, Pretoria. He's here to visit the Transvaal Museum of Anthropology and Geology, which houses a vast collection of natural history exhibits. He's been invited here by principal researcher Dr. Francis Thackeray to study the hominid fossils discovered at other archaeological sites.
From Stokefontein, we have a relatively large sample of Australopithecus africanus now, and we've been able to establish that these were omnivores. They were eating both plant food and they had access to animal protein.
The careful study of these other hominid remains has meant we now have a clearer picture of how the Taung Child and his fellow Australopithecines would have lived.
If one imagines what might have happened in the day of an Australopithecine 2.5 million years ago, one can imagine them getting up in the morning as temperature rises at sunrise, and they may well have scavenged the carcasses of wildebeest and hartebeest. They might also have been digging for termites. We know that the bone tools were used for opening up termite mounds. They may well have also hunted. Obviously, small prey may have been accessible, but very likely scavenging was an important mode of getting access to protein.
The life and times of the Taung Child are becoming clearer, but can these other fossil remains, many of which also appear to have suffered premature, sometimes violent deaths, give us any clues as to how the Taung Child died?
From Swartkrans, we have this specimen. It's called Australopithecus robustus, and you can see very clearly there are 2 puncture marks there, and the distance between holes matches very closely the distance between the tips of the canines of a leopard. So this is strong evidence of what happened on one day, approximately 1.5 million years ago, and it's entirely possible that the Taung Child was also susceptible to carnivore predation.
So perhaps the young 3 or 4 year old Taung Child didn't die of illness or disease. Perhaps, like many of its relations, it suffered a horrible death at the jaws of a big cat. Kevin wants to discover the extent to which hominids were routinely hunted and killed by predators, and whether this could have been the fate of the Taung Child. For this, he needs to study other examples of this species. About 250 miles from Taung are the Sterkfontein Caves, a World Heritage Site, where visitors can experience the anthropological treasure house of the world and imagine their earliest upright walking ancestors roaming and hunting across this landscape. Here, many more Australopithecus africanus remains, the same species as Taung Child, were discovered in the years following Dart's studies. By examining these, Kevin can get a clearer picture of the life and death of the Taung Child. Kevin explores the site with Professor Tim Partridge of the Sterkfontein Research Unit to find out why these caves have provided us with so many hominid remains.
The circumstances of preservation here are very special. These are dolomite caves, rich in calcium carbonate, and as the fossil material finds its way into the caves, together with soil and other debris, they are replaced molecule by molecule by calcium carbonate, which is a very hard material. So that helps the preservation process.
And how is it that those particular specimens actually got into the cave fill?
Some of them were dropped in the vicinity of the mouths of the caves by predators and scavengers and found their way into the entrances. Others fell in through deep shafts, cave in that case acting as a death trap.
So did the Taung Child fall to his death through the roof of the cave? If so, it seems that the whole skeleton would have been found, and not just the head. The fact that the body was missing, coupled with the remains of other mammalian prey at the site, suggests that it was the lair of a predator, complete with the scattered remains of its prey. So what kind of predator could this have been? On the plains, not far away from the caves, Tim Partridge paints a picture of the harsh life that our early ancestors would have endured.
It would have been a fairly hostile world. There would have been the usual range of predators that one has on the African veldt. And it is thought commonly that leopards were among the most dangerous of the predators for these early hominids. But other evidence also suggests that eagles and one or two other creatures, such as the long-legged hunting hyena, might well have been implicated as well.
It now seems almost certain that one of these predators dragged the child into the cave at Taung, where its skull was discovered amongst the scattered fossil remains of baboon and antelope. And is there any evidence amongst the dozens of hominid remains found over the years at the Sterkfontein caves that can help us date the Taung Child more exactly and find out whether it really was the missing link? The fruitful decades of the mid-20th century yielded dozens of hominid remains, which were clearly related to the Taung Child, though identified at first as belonging to a different genus, Plesianthropus, meaning almost human. The most famous was given the nickname Mrs. Pless, a beautifully preserved skull believed to be that of an adult female. Later, Mrs. Pless and the other Sterkfontein remains were reclassified as Australopithecus africanus. Mrs. Pless is now kept at the Transvaal Museum in Pretoria. Dr. Francis Thackeray tells the story of its discovery in 1947 by paleontologist Dr. Robert Broom.
Robert Broom had gone in illegally, actually, and he had the assistance of miners. Remarkably, Sterkfontein, just as at Taung, miners were blasting for limestone. And Robert Broom asked the miners, blast here. And when the dust had settled, there was Mrs. Pless in two pieces. The top of the cranium had actually been blasted out.
The accurate dating of Mrs. Pless is key to identifying her and the Taung Child as part of the missing link.
Mrs. Pless has been found with fossils of many species, pigs, antelope, and these can be used actually for dating by comparison with the East African sites, which are well dated using potassium and argon.
Further research into the magnetic properties of the calcite at Sterkfontein and Taung has revealed the comparative dates of the fossils found there. Scientists now know just how long ago Mrs. Pless and the Taung Child lived.
We believe that Mrs. Pless is in the order of 2.6 million years. And we believe that the Taung Child is likely to be somewhere between 2 and 2.5 million years.
These findings corroborate Dart's claim that indeed he had identified the missing link in the Taung Child. Returning to Johannesburg, Kevin still has a lot of unanswered questions on his mind.
Well, now I'm going to head back to the university. to have another look at the fossils in the safe. We've established pretty clearly that the Taung Child died due to some predator, and now we want to know which one.
Kevin takes the precious Taung Child fossil from its home in the university safe to the Mill Park Hospital in the center of Johannesburg. Here, the different pieces of the fossil are scanned using the latest CT technology. Kevin is looking for any evidence of predator attack. The skeletal fossils show no such signs. However, the fossilized endocranial cast, representing the shape of the empty brain cavity, reveals some interesting indentations on the top and to one side. These will be examined by CAT scan.
Well, the advantage of using a technology like CT is it allows us to essentially dissect the specimen without causing any damage to it. And that's really the critical aspect for analyzing fossils, because we don't want to damage them.
The CAT scan allowed the scientists to visualize the internal structures and to create 3D reconstructions of the Taung Child's face, jaw, and endocranial cast, but didn't enlighten them further on the cause of death. Kevin seeks the opinion once again of Professor Philip Tobias. He provides a dramatic hypothesis to explain these small depressions.
Just lift that a little. Yeah. Between the four depressions, we've got the possible marks of a four-taloned eagle claw. The right distance apart and right relative sizes of the three anterior ones and this large posterior one, the killing talon. And so there is evidence there which seems to support the theory put forward by Berger and Clark that an aerial predator, not a terrestrial predator, namely a raptor like a big black eagle, could have carried it off, shook its head off from the rest of the body, and been responsible for getting the head of the Taung Child into that area.
This is by no means a far-fetched idea. There have been modern-day reports of eagles attempting to carry off small children. In August 2001, on a crowded beach in New England, an eagle swooped down, grabbed a child's head in its claws, and attempted to carry it off.
So that kind of behavior is with us today on the part of raptors. Could it have had a 2.5 million year history, that sort of behavior, of which this is a spectacular and tragic example.
So finally, have we discovered the fate of the Taung Child? Perhaps as he foraged on the open plain, he was attacked and borne aloft by a huge primate-eating eagle, his body shaken free and his head carried off to a cave. Kevin is left to contemplate this horrific possibility.
I'm still a bit skeptical. The marks on the brain cast could perhaps have been formed by other factors. Perhaps something relating to the blasting that uncovered the skull in the first place, or some other preservational factor that resulted in the brain cast itself. So perhaps this answer will remain a mystery.
So for Kevin, the exact nature of the child's death remains inconclusive. However, he is certain of one thing. Today, millions of years after the small hominid child met his end, its amazing fossil continues to play a crucial role in our understanding of human evolution.